"Why are you singing that lullaby, human?" That's the exact line that gets said to our main character halfway through this story, and once I read the full script, I understood why it stopped me cold. It's not really a question about music. It's a question about who he is, who those two little girls really are, and why a grieving alien queen is about to feel her whole world crack open in front of a man she was ready to execute 5 minutes earlier. Stick with me through this one. The payoff at the end genuinely got me. Callum Reyes hadn't planned on becoming a father. He definitely hadn't planned on becoming a father to two alien children with silver blue skin and eyes like wet glass, found half drowned in the wreckage of a transport ship nobody wanted to claim. That had been 8 months ago, on a rusted border moon called Aldenmore, a place so far from any core world that the Coalition barely bothered patrolling it. Callum had been running a one-man medical relay station there since he'd left the war behind, the kind of posting people took when they didn't want to be found. He'd built a life out of spare parts and low expectations. Then a Virenai slave transport got torn apart by pirates in the debris field above the moon, and 2 small bodies washed up in an escape pod that had drifted for 6 days, with no power and no food. He still remembered pulling the hatch open and finding them tangled together, the older one's arm locked around the younger one like she'd decided, somewhere in that darkness, that she was the only thing keeping her sister alive. Maybe she was. He never got real names out of them, not at first. The Virenai language didn't translate cleanly through his old military implant, and the girls were too traumatized to try. So he'd given them names the way you name a stray you already know you're going to keep. The older one, sharp-eyed and always watching the door, became Nell. The younger one, softer, quieter, prone to nightmares that made the whole station's lights flicker, became Ren. Nell learned Coalition Standard in about 6 weeks, which should have told him something. Ren took longer, and when she was scared, she still hummed instead of talking, this strange layered tone that didn't sound like anything human throats could make. Callum used to lie awake wondering what kind of species raises children who can do that. He never got an answer to that question. Not until the night everything came apart. It started with the nightmares. Ren's nightmares had always been bad, but that spring they got worse, the kind of screaming that brought Nell running down the hall before Callum even had his boots on. He'd sit on the edge of the small bed they shared, Ren shaking against him, and he'd do the only thing that ever worked. He'd sing. It wasn't a good voice. His sister used to tease him about it back on Earth, back before the war took her, back before he stopped letting himself think about home too often. But she was the one who'd taught him the lullaby in the first place, an old thing their grandmother used to sing, something about a sailor coming home across dark water. He hadn't sung it in 15 years until Ren's first night terror, and it had come out of him like his body remembered it even when his mind had tried to forget. It worked every time. Ren would go quiet, her breathing would slow, and eventually she'd fall asleep with her small hand fisted in his shirt. Nell would watch from the doorway with an expression Callum couldn't read, something between relief and grief, like the song hurt her even as it helped her sister. He didn't think much of it. Kids like familiar sounds. That was all it was as far as he knew. He was wrong, and the woman who proved it to him arrived on a supply shuttle 3 days later wearing a Coalition trade badge that Callum's instincts told him was fake before his eyes even finished reading it. Her name, she said, was Sorel. Mid-30s by Virenai reckoning, tall in that way their species tended to be, with the same silver-blue undertone to her skin as the girls, though hers had gone pale with what looked like exhaustion worn deep into the bone. She said she was inspecting frontier relay stations for supply fraud. She said a lot of things in the first hour Callum knew her, and every single one of them was a lie designed to get her inside his station without raising an alarm. He let her in anyway, because turning away a Coalition inspector on a moon this isolated was a good way to get his station flagged for review, and reviews meant questions about 2 undocumented alien children living under his roof. Questions he couldn't afford. Cyril was good. She asked about supply manifests and fuel allocations and made careful, boring small talk while her eyes tracked every hallway, every door, every sound in the station like she was building a map in her head. Callum had spent enough years in the war to recognize a soldier wearing a civilian's face. He just didn't know yet whose war she was fighting. It was Ren who broke the whole thing open, and she didn't even mean to. The girl came around the corner at the worst possible moment, mid-afternoon, tired from a nap that hadn't gone well. And she was humming. Not words. Just that strange layered tone Callum had grown used to over the months, the one that used to make the station lights flicker when she was small and scared and hadn't learned to control it yet. Cyril went completely still. Callum saw it happen in real time, the mask sliding off her face like it had never been there. Her eyes locked onto Ren with an intensity that made his skin crawl, and for one terrible second he thought she might actually stop breathing. "Where?" Cyril said, her voice gone low and strange. "Did that child learn the ashfall hum?" Callum didn't know what an ashfall hum was. He knew enough to step between Cyril and the girls without thinking twice about it. The old reflex from a man who used to run toward gunfire for a living. "She's mine," he said. "She hums when she's tired. That's all it is." That is not all it is. Cyril's hand had drifted toward her hip, toward something concealed under her jacket that Callum was fairly sure wasn't a supply manifest. That sound is a royal cradle song of House Virnoth. It has not been heard outside the Viranai home system in 19 years. It died with the royal line at the Kesrith massacre. The words hit Callum like cold water. He'd heard about the Kesrith massacre. Everyone in this sector had. An entire royal bloodline slaughtered in a single night by rival houses looking to seize the throne. The story went that the queen's 2 daughters had died in the attack along with the rest of the family, their bodies never recovered from the wreckage of the escaping transport. He looked at Ren, humming softly to herself, oblivious to the woman staring at her like she'd seen a ghost. He looked at Nell, who had gone very quiet in the hallway behind her sister. Her sharp eyes locked on Cyril with an expression Callum had never seen on her before. Recognition, fear, something close to hope, buried so deep it looked like pain. "You know something," Callum said slowly. "Both of you know something." Nell's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "We were told never to sing that song where anyone could hear. Mother said it would get us killed." Cyril made a sound Callum had never heard a grown woman make before. Something halfway between a sob and a gasp, and dropped to one knee in the hallway of his rundown medical station like she was standing in front of a throne. "Your Highnesses," she breathed. 9 years I have searched every border world in this sector. 9 years I told myself I was chasing ghosts." She looked up at them with tears cutting silver tracks down her face. "The Queen believes her daughters died at Kesrith. She has never stopped grieving you. She has never stopped searching." Callum's stomach dropped through the floor. He'd spent 8 months quietly raising 2 little girls he thought had no family left in the galaxy. And it turned out he'd been hiding the last surviving heirs of a throne from the very people who'd murdered their entire household to take it, which meant the people who'd hunted them at Kesrith were still out there. And now, somehow, they were about to find out exactly where these girls had been hiding all along. Cyril rose to her feet, and the softness in her face was gone, replaced by something harder, something Callum recognized immediately because he used to wear that same expression himself, back when he was a soldier instead of a man running a broken relay station at the edge of nowhere. "We have to move them tonight," Cyril said, "because if I found this station by following rumors and a 9-year-old prayer, the Ash Concord will find it by following me." Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose panel on the station's east wall the way it always did before a storm rolled in off the ridge. Callum had heard that sound 100 times and never once thought anything of it. Tonight, for the first time, it sounded like a countdown. "I want to know what you think is coming next. Because I promise the next part goes somewhere I didn't see coming either." Part 2 picks up minutes after Cyril says the word tonight, and this is where the story stops being a rescue and starts being a chase. I won't spoil where it lands. Just trust me that the quiet moment with the lullaby near the middle of this section is the one that made me stop and reread it twice. They had 11 minutes before the supply shuttle's automated check-in pinged Coalition dispatch, which meant they had 11 minutes before anyone official noticed Cyril had gone dark mid-inspection. After that, Callum knew it wouldn't just be the Ash Concord looking for 2 missing girls and a rogue Viranai agent. It would be everyone. He didn't waste the 11 minutes arguing. He'd learned a long time ago that arguing during an evacuation got people killed, so instead he pulled 2 go bags out from under the floor panel in his own quarters. bags he'd packed years ago out of habit and never once needed until tonight, and he shoved Nell's boots into her hands before she'd even finished asking what was happening. "You knew this day might come," he said to her, not a question. Nell's jaw tightened in a way that made her look far older than 9 years old. Mother always said someone would find us eventually. She just hoped it would be her. Wren clung to Callum's leg the entire time he moved through the station, shutting down power cells and wiping logs, humming under her breath in that strange layered tone. Faster now, more frightened. He crouched down to her level once, just for a second, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Not yet," he told her quietly. "Not that song. Not until you're somewhere safe." She stopped humming. She didn't stop shaking. Cyril had commandeered his old long-range transport, a boxy little cargo hauler that hadn't left atmosphere in 2 years. And she was running diagnostics with the kind of speed that told Callum she'd done this exact thing before. Probably more than once. Probably somewhere much worse than a rusted moon station. "There's a coalition waypoint 11 hours from here," she said without looking up from the console. "Neutral ground, technically outside Virani jurisdiction. Which means the Concord can't touch us there without starting a diplomatic incident they don't want. I can get a message to the Queen's household from there, and if they catch us before we make it 11 hours? Cyril finally looked at him, and there was something almost gentle underneath the exhaustion in her face. "Then I die making sure they don't get any further than me. That's the job I signed up for." Callum had heard that particular tone of voice before. In his own mouth. Back when he still wore a uniform and meant every word of a promise like that. It unsettled him to hear it coming from someone he'd known for 4 hours. It unsettled him more that some part of him already believed her. They lifted off Aldenmore 8 minutes before the check-in ping would have gone out, climbing through atmosphere into the kind of dark, quiet space that always felt to Callum like holding your breath. Wren fell asleep against his side within the first hour, worn out from crying. Nell sat across from them, awake, alert, watching the sensor display over Cyril's shoulder like she expected it to betray them at any moment. "You don't have to keep guard duty," Callum told her gently. "Not tonight." "Someone has to," Nell said. "You don't know what's coming." "I do." She told him then in pieces, the way children tell you the worst things in their lives, sideways and softened and always leaving out the parts that hurt too much to say directly. She told him about the night at Kesrith, about her mother screaming for the girls to run, about hiding in a maintenance duct while men in dark armor moved through the palace corridors killing everyone with royal blood in their veins. She told him about the escape pod, about her mother's household guard sacrificing himself to buy them 30 extra seconds, about 6 days adrift with no food and a sister too young to understand why they couldn't go home. Callum listened without interrupting, the way he'd learned to listen to soldiers describing the worst night of their lives. Because he knew that kind of story only comes out once, and if you flinch or push too hard, it goes back into hiding for years. "Your mother's still alive," he said when she finished. "Cyril says she's been searching for you both this whole time." Nell's composure cracked for just a second, just long enough for Callum to see the little girl underneath the guarded soldier she'd taught herself to become. "I used to be so angry at her," she whispered, "for not finding us sooner. And now I don't know if I'm angry or if I just want to see her face again so badly it hurts." "Both," Callum said. "You're allowed to feel both." She looked at him like nobody had ever told her that before, and maybe nobody had. It was somewhere around hour 4 that the sensors lit up red, and Cyril's whole body went rigid at the console. "Concord patrol vessel," she said. "Small, fast, definitely not supposed to be out this far from their claimed territory. Which tells me they've been watching Aldenmore a lot longer than we thought." She was already pulling up evasive routing, hands moving faster than Callum's eyes could follow. "They haven't locked onto us yet. If we cut engines and drift, we might slip past their scan window." "Might, it's the only card I've got, Reyes, they cut engines." The cargo hauler went dark and silent, drifting on momentum alone through open space, and for 6 of the longest minutes of Callum's life. Nobody breathed too loud. Wren stirred against him in her sleep, murmuring something, and Callum felt his heart stop before he realized she wasn't humming, just dreaming, just a child's small restless noise in the dark. The patrol vessel passed within 4,000 kilometers and never turned toward them. Cyril let out a breath that shook on the way out, and Callum realized. watching her hands finally unclench from the console, just how much weight this one woman had been carrying alone for 9 years. "How did you even start looking for them?" he asked quietly, once engines were back online and the ship was moving again. 9 years is a long time to chase something everyone else calls a ghost. Cyril was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was deciding how much of herself to hand over to a stranger. "I was supposed to be on guard duty at Kesrith that night," she said finally. "I traded shifts with a friend so I could attend my sister's wedding off-world. My friend died defending the nursery. I've spent every year since telling myself that if I'd been there, maybe I could have gotten the girls out safely instead of leaving it to a man who paid with his life for 30 seconds. She glanced back at Nell, asleep now against Callum's other side, and something in her face broke open with a tenderness that had nothing to do with duty. "I didn't start this search for the Queen. I started it for him. Finding them alive is the only thing that's made any of it feel like it wasn't wasted." Callum understood that kind of grief better than he wanted to admit. He'd carried something similar out of the war himself, the weight of people he couldn't save, the strange guilt of surviving when others hadn't. Looking at Cyril across the dim cabin light, he felt something shift quietly in his chest. Something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. Not just sympathy. Recognition. The particular gravity of finding someone who understood exactly the shape of the hole grief leaves behind. "You didn't waste anything," he said. "You found them. That's not nothing. That's everything." Cyril held his gaze a beat too long before looking away, and Callum noticed the color rise faintly under the silver blue of her skin, and he thought, absurdly, in the middle of an active manhunt 11 hours from safety, that he liked the way she looked when she wasn't in control of every muscle in her face. It was Wren who broke the moment, stirring awake with a small gasp, her hand shooting out to grip Callum's sleeve. "Papa Cal," she whispered. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Callum had learned months ago not to dismiss that particular tone in her voice. "What do you feel, sweetheart?" Wren's eyes, wide and frightened, fixed on the cabin viewport where nothing but stars and darkness stretched in every direction. "Someone's singing," she said. "Far away. But it's the same song you sing me. I can hear it." Cyril's hands froze over the console for the second time that night, and this time when she turned around, her face had gone completely white. "That's not possible," she breathed. "Unless," the console chimed. A new contact had appeared on long-range sensors, moving fast, moving directly toward them, its ident beacon broadcasting a royal seal Callum didn't recognize, but Cyril clearly did, because she was already on her feet, already reaching for the comm array with hands that trembled for the first time since he'd met her. "That's a Virenai royal cruiser," she said. "That's not the Concorde." She looked back at Wren, at the little girl whose small face had gone still and strange, and listening, hearing something none of the rest of them could, across all that empty dark. "I think," Cyril said slowly, "your mother already knows exactly where you are." "All right, I have to admit that ending got me a little emotional writing it out, and part 3 is where the Queen and the girls finally face each other, so if you thought this story had already hit its peak, it hasn't." The royal cruiser closed the distance in 11 minutes, and Callum spent every one of them standing at the viewport with his heart trying to climb out of his chest, watching a ship built for a queen bear down on a battered little cargo hauler that had never been meant to carry anything this important. Cyril worked the comm array with shaking hands, broadcasting an old household authentication code she hadn't used in 9 years, praying it still meant something to whoever was listening on the other end. For a long, terrible stretch, there was nothing but static. Then a voice came through, clipped and formal, and utterly exhausted in a way that only years of grief could produce. "Identify yourself. You are broadcasting a code belonging to a household guard presumed dead." "Because I let everyone believe I was," Cyril said, her voice cracking. "Please, tell the Queen it's Cyril Vantho. Tell her I found them. Tell her I found her daughters." The silence that followed felt longer than the whole night before it. When the cruiser docked, Callum stood behind Nell and Wren with his hands resting lightly on their shoulders, not holding them back, just close enough to catch them if their legs gave out. He had no idea what a queen who'd spent 9 years grieving her children was supposed to look like walking through an airlock. He found out soon enough. She came through alone, waving off an entire honor guard behind her with a single sharp gesture, and Callum understood in that moment that this was not a woman who did anything by protocol when it came to her daughters. She was tall, silver blue like the girls, with lines of grief carved so deep into her face they looked permanent. The kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could ever fully undo. Her eyes swept the cargo bay once, twice, and then landed on Nell and Ren, and every ounce of royal composure she'd walked in with simply collapsed. She didn't run. Callum thought later that she probably couldn't, that her legs had simply stopped listening to her the same way his had once, years ago. In a moment he still didn't like remembering. She walked forward slowly, like she was afraid the whole scene would shatter if she moved too fast, like 9 years of hoping against every rational instinct had left her unable to trust her own eyes. "Nell," she whispered. "Ren," Nell broke first, all that careful, guarded composure she'd built over 9 years cracking apart in an instant. And she was across the cargo bay and in her mother's arms before Callum could even process the movement. Ren followed a half-second later, small and sobbing, swallowed up in an embrace that looked like it had been waiting 9 years to happen. The queen sank to her knees on the cargo bay floor, holding both her daughters like she was afraid letting go would make them disappear again. And Callum stood there watching a reunion 9 years and one massacre in the making, and felt his own throat close up in a way he hadn't expected. It was Ren who pulled back first, just slightly, just enough to look up at her mother's face, and in the quiet that followed, she started to hum. Callum's whole body went cold. It was the lullaby. His lullaby, the one his sister taught him, the one he'd sung to a frightened little girl for 8 months without ever knowing what it truly meant to the people around her. Except Ren wasn't singing it the way he sang it. She was singing it the way the girls always had, layered and strange and beautiful in a way no human throat could fully replicate, and underneath it, faint and broken. The queen had started to sing along. The queen's head snapped up. Her eyes found Callum across the cargo bay, and for a moment her expression shifted from grief to something sharper, more dangerous, the look of a woman who had lost everything once already and was not prepared to lose it again. "Why?" she said slowly. "Are you singing that lullaby, human?" The whole bay went still. Callum felt Cyril tense beside him, one hand drifting toward the weapon at her hip, ready to defend him if this went the wrong way. He understood the question underneath the question. That song belonged to House Vyrnoth. It was a cradle song, passed down through royal blood, sung only by mothers to their own children in the deepest privacy of a nursery no outsider was ever meant to hear. For a human to know it, to teach it to her daughters as though it were his own, looked exactly like what it would look like to any grieving mother. Theft, or worse. "I didn't teach it to her," Callum said carefully. "I sang it to comfort her because she had nightmares, and it was the only lullaby I knew. My sister taught it to me back on Earth, before she died. I had no idea it meant anything to your people. I swear to you I had no idea." The queen's eyes narrowed, sharp with a suspicion Callum couldn't blame her for carrying. "That is not possible. That song exists nowhere outside my household. It was written for my own mother, and her mother before her. It has never left Virenai space." "Then maybe," Cyril said quietly, stepping forward. "It left a very long time ago, and neither of us knew it." She reached into her jacket and produced a small data chip, one Callum hadn't known she was carrying, and held it out toward the queen with visible hesitation. "Before I left the household 9 years ago, I found fragments in the old royal archive, genealogical records, going back centuries, further than anyone in the current court ever bothered to trace. There were notes about an old trade expedition, a human vessel that made contact with a Virenai research outpost generations before the coalition even existed. A friendship formed, a song exchanged as a gift between two mothers who never expected to see each other again." She looked at Callum, something soft and searching in her expression. "I never told anyone. It seemed like an old, forgotten thing, until tonight." The queen stared at the chip in Cyril's hand for a long moment, then looked back at Callum, at the man who had kept her daughters alive and safe and loved for 8 months on a rusted little moon at the edge of nowhere, without ever knowing whose children he was raising. "You sang it to comfort her," the queen said slowly, not knowing it was hers to begin with. "I sang it because she was scared and I didn't know how else to help her," Callum said. "That's all it ever was to me." Something in the queen's face finally broke, not with suspicion this time, but with something gentler. something that looked almost like disbelief giving way to gratitude too large to hold. "Then it seems," she said, her voice thick, "that a song my family believed belonged to us alone was never truly ours at all. It was always meant to travel. It simply took a very long road to find its way back to us." She looked down at her daughters, still wrapped around her, and pressed a kiss to each of their heads. "And it seems it carried my daughters home in the process." She rose to her feet slowly, still holding both girls close, and turned her full attention to Callum for the first time since the reunion had started. Her eyes swept over him, taking in a man who looked nothing like a soldier or a diplomat. Just tired and worn, and entirely unprepared for the weight of what he'd stumbled into. "You kept them alive," she said. "You kept them safe and loved, in a galaxy that spent 9 years hunting them for the crime of surviving. I do not have words large enough for what that means to me. I am not certain such words exist in any language. They didn't need grand words from me," Callum said. "They just needed somewhere safe to be children for a while." The Queen studied him a moment longer, then turned to Cyril, and something passed between the two women that Callum couldn't fully read. Old history, old guilt, old grief finally beginning to loosen its grip. "You disappeared 9 years ago without a word," the Queen said quietly. "I mourned you as dead alongside my daughters. I couldn't face you with nothing to show for it," Cyril said. "I couldn't come back until I'd found them, or died trying." "You found them," the Queen said. "Come home, Cyril Vantho. Your household has grieved you long enough. It should have been simple after that. A rescue completed, a family reunited, a threat still lurking somewhere out in the dark but no longer close enough to touch them tonight." Except Callum found himself watching Cyril's face as she absorbed the invitation home, and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the quiet ache of watching someone you'd only known for a single impossible night prepare to walk back into a life that didn't include you. Nell noticed it before anyone said a word. 9 years old, and sharper than most adults Callum had known in the war, she slipped out of her mother's arms and crossed the cargo bay to tug on his sleeve. "You're not leaving us," she said. It wasn't a question. Callum crouched down to her level, throat tight. "That's not really up to me, sweetheart. You're going home. Your real home." "You are our real home," Nell said fiercely. "You just didn't know it yet either." The Queen, who had been listening, looked at her daughter, then at Callum, then back at Cyril standing quietly beside him with an expression she was clearly trying and failing to keep unreadable. Something like understanding crossed the Queen's face, gentle and knowing in the way only a mother's face can be. "It seems," she said slowly, "that my daughters have already decided this matter for all of us. Perhaps it would be wise for the rest of us to stop pretending we have a say." She looked directly at Callum then, something warm finally breaking through the exhaustion in her eyes. "House Virnoth does not forget its debts, human, nor does it release those it comes to consider family. If you are willing, there is a place for you in my daughters' lives for as long as they wish it." And, her gaze flicked briefly, deliberately, to Cyril, "perhaps a place for both of you, together, if that is a road you find yourselves wanting to walk." Cyril's hand found Callum's in the quiet that followed, and for the first time since the wreckage of that escape pod 8 months ago. Callum felt something settle inside him that he hadn't realized he'd been missing his whole life. Not just a family he'd built out of 2 frightened little girls and an old lullaby. A future he hadn't let himself imagine until a stranger walked into his station wearing a fake trade badge and a 9-year grief she'd carried entirely alone. Outside the viewport, the stars kept turning the same as they always had, indifferent to everything that had just changed inside that small cargo bay. But for the first time in 9 years, nobody on board was running from anything at all. I don't know about you, but that last scene absolutely wrecked me a little. In the best way. This is exactly the kind of story I love bringing to this channel. The quiet human moments hiding inside the huge galactic stakes. If it hit you the same way, drop a like. Share it with someone who needs a good cry disguised as a sci-fi story, and subscribe to HFY Soundscape so you don't miss the next one. I've got a lot more of these coming.